Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to have you here in chapel. My name's Steve. I'm the worship pastor at Crestview Christian Church. This is the worship band from part of the worship band from Crestview, and we're excited to be here with you this morning. We're gonna worship, and we're excited to do that. Let's stand as we do that, and I'm gonna remember what key we're in. Here we go. the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors. He parted the raging seas. My God, He holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't quiet. We shout out your praise. with me, God in heaven, may that truth rest on us today. And when we think about your love that you have for us, we would be overwhelmed. That the idea of a creator God in all the authority to speak everything that we know into existence would not be distant, would not be separated from us, but would desire to be close to our hearts. God showing that ultimately through the act of the Son, Christ Jesus, who died on a cross and rose up on the grave because, God, you roll stones away. Father, we thank you. We turn our hearts now to the truth and authority of your word. Speak to us as we hear your word. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Have a seat.
Let us hear God's word from the book of Daniel. One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. As they stood before the king, he said, "I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic, "Long live the king. Tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." But the king said to the astrologers, "I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means." They said again, "Please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means." The king replied, "I know what you're doing. You're stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means." The astrologers replied to the king, "No one on earth can tell the king his dream, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people." The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, the word of the Lord. No, it's good. He asked Arioch, "Why has the king issued such a harsh decree?" So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret, so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. He said, "Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we ask of you and revealed to us what the king demanded." The word of the Lord.
Good morning. For once you were in darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. For once you were darkness, but now the Lord you are light. Live as children, light. There was once a young man named Daniel. Well, the Babylonians renamed him Belteshazzar, but Daniel was his Hebrew name. Daniel had grown up in Jerusalem, son of nobility. And he was a promising young man, devout, intelligent, good-looking. He was everything you would want in an up-and-coming leader, and it wouldn't have surprised anybody if someday Daniel was walking around the temple or palace complex, high official, prophet. Daniel seemed destined for greatness. That is, of course, until everything changed in 597 when the Babylonians came to town and took back with them everything good and lovely, including Daniel and his friends. Instead of studying Torah and laughing with his friends with the Mount of Olives at their backs, they now were learning Akkadian, reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, and surrounded by temples to foreign gods. The Babylonians had stripped them of everything, their homeland, their people, their possessions, their homes, even their names. Daniel and his friends refused, however, to give up on who they were. They drew the line in the sand by refusing to eat the unclean food of the royal palace, by developing some sort of contest with the palace master. And God rewarded them for their devotion by giving them even further wisdom and skill. And before long, they found themselves in the service of King Nebuchadnezzar himself. And so they settled in. They were hundreds of miles away from their homeland and their people, but God had prospered them. And so they decided that they might at least have a chance. They hunkered down, scratched out a life, tried to please God as best they could. What more could you do in a situation like that? That was the plan, at least, until one day the king's executioner showed up at Daniel's front door. "I'm here for your head," he said. There was once a young woman named Therese. Well, her name was actually Therese Delegieux, and she is also called Therese Elephant Jésus et de la Saint Face. But for us English speakers, Therese is fine, you know. Therese was the daughter of devout Catholics, one of 5 daughters who would all become nuns. How's your family doing? Right? And as the youngest child, and as youngest children you tend to be, I can say this because I am one, she grew up a little bit of a spoiled child, had a little bit of, a desire to get what she wanted, was prone to weeping and crying, but her family loved well and was well loved, and so they did just fine. That's not to say that Therese did not experience hardships in her life. Her mother actually died of breast cancer when she was just 4.5 years old. And the following years were especially difficult for her and her family. They moved to a different city. She excelled in school, but she found that she was bullied for being smart, and she was plagued by a sense of fear and sadness. Her emotional frustration and sensitivity was so great that she found herself experiencing episodes of tremors, physical manifestation of her emotional trauma. Everything changed, though, Christmas Eve, when Therese was 13 years old. She later reflected on that night, crying, as was her custom, after a small family squabble, that God had performed a small miracle in her heart. That she experienced freedom for the first time in the choice to die to self, to put her needs and desires second. And she recovered the strength of her soul that she had lost after the death of her mother years before. And from that moment on, she would follow her little way, a path of devotion to Jesus marked by retreat and subtraction. She embodied the words of John the Baptist, who spoke about Jesus, "He must increase, I must decrease." And so Therese became a candidate to become a nun when she was 15 years old. 2 years later, she gave her religious profession and entered into a convent as a Carmelite nun at the age of 17. Look around. 17. She felt her calling was to pray for her fellow clergymen, her priests, brothers, to ask God for his support, to intercede for them so that they could complete the work of saving lives. She consistently reflected that even in life's sufferings, including those which she had experienced, they could act as the medium by which we experience grace. And so she continued in this work for several years. And then when she was 23 years old, the night before Good Friday, she laid down to go to bed, and her head had scarcely touched the pillow when she felt a curious sensation, like a bubbling stream mounting to her lips. Following morning, she looked at her handkerchief and found it soaked in blood. And that day, coughing up blood meant tuberculosis. Tuberculosis meant death. There was once a young man named Frank. Well, I think his name was actually Adam, but we all just knew him as Frank. He walked onto campus and just said, "Hi, I'm Frank," and we just kind of went with it, you know. And that's kind of Frank in a nutshell. He was a natural leader, friendly, charismatic, but not someone who took himself very seriously, knew how to have fun. All growing up, Frank thought and figured he was going to be an architect. His father was an architect, his grandfather was an architect, his brother was an engineer. But that's pretty close, right? And so Frank had kind of his plan marked out. He's a smart kid, you know, took a bunch of AP classes. And then he went on a mission trip his junior year. That changed his life. He experienced the grace of God in a way he never had before. And when he came back, he began volunteering in worship ministry at church. He started getting involved at the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at his school. His family had always gone to church, but for the first time, Frank's faith became a central part of his life. You know what I mean? So he ended up going to a Christian college that conveniently also would allow him to pursue his dream of being an architect. And like I said, from the moment he stepped on campus, it seemed like he was meant to be there. He jumped into his classes. He was even elected freshman rep for StuGov. He even got a date or two. I mean, not too shabby for Frank, right? Fast forward a year or two, and Frank had done well in his classes. He even made it past that crazy Old Testament prof. I mean, those guys are just nuts, you know, like... he loved his suite of guys, guys that had his back, that they would stay up late talking about life and faith or just playing Call of Duty, whatever. You know, they just had a good time together. He had a job at a nearby coffee shop, and he enjoyed what he did. Life was good. And so Frank was just about as surprised as anyone when about halfway through that semester, he hit a wall. Arioch, hold on, Daniel said. What do you mean you're here for my head? And so the executioner explained himself. King Nebuchadnezzar, may he live forever, He had a dream, and you know how he is about his dreams. His attendants said he woke up white as a sheet, and so he called in all the soothsayers, all the magicians, all the wise men, and he ordered them to tell him both the dream and their interpretation. Daniel said, wait a second, how are they supposed to tell him the interpretation of a dream that he hasn't even told them? Well, that's what they said, the executioner replied. But Nebuchadnezzar, may he live forever, said that they would just tell him what he wanted to hear, that they would lie to him and tell him manipulative words. He said the only way he could trust their interpretation is if they told him the dream first. Well, the sorcerers answered that no man alive could do what the king asked, and that sent him into a fit. You know how he gets. May he live forever. He ordered that every wise man and magician in Babylon be destroyed. So here I am. Well, now it was Daniel's turn to turn pale. He asked if he could have some time to see if somehow he could fulfill the king's demands. Arioch agreed to take Daniel's request back to the palace, and a short time later, he returned, and he said to Daniel, you have until tomorrow morning. What followed was one of the longest nights of Daniel's life. He retreated to his small room and began to pray. And at first he prayed expectantly, "O God of Israel, reveal what the king has ordered." He prayed the prayer of his ancestor Abraham. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Shall not the judge of the whole earth do what is right?" But by the start of the third watch, cold of the night creeping in, Daniel's prayers grew more desperate. "Have you brought us here only to kill us? How long, O Lord? Have you forgotten us forever? How long will you hide your face from me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. I trusted in your steadfast love. Help me to trust in you still." In the midst of these moments of fragile hope, Daniel finally had a vision. Looking at the dark red patches on her handkerchief, Teresa's initial response was actually an overwhelming peace and joy. How wonderful, how lovely, she thought, that on the anniversary of Christ's death, he should begin to call me home to be with him. That initial jubilation, however, would soon give way to a deep gloom. And over the next several months, as tuberculosis began to consume her body, a deep agony began to consume her joy. Speaking to her sisters, she said, "One must have passed through the tunnel to understand how black is its darkness. The fog that surrounds me finds its way into my very soul, and so blinds me that I can no longer see the lovely picture of my promised home. It has all faded away. Sometimes, I confess, a feeble ray of sunshine penetrates my dark night and brings me a moment's relief. But after it is gone, the remembrance of it, instead of consoling me, makes the blackness seem darker still." In calling her season her dark night, Therese was echoing the language of the doctor of the church and mystic St. John of the Cross, who in his writings spoke about the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is a time when we experience the silence of God, when we sense that he has hidden his face from us. Or conversely, when we find ourselves unable to feel anything at all, spiritually numb, it's an occasion of confusion, disappointment, loss. Now, unlike Daniel, Teresa's dark night would last far longer than a single night. It would last for months. Yet, even as she struggled to maintain hope in eternity, there was one thing that grounded her and helped her persevere. It was an image of the face of Jesus, bruised and bloodied, with a crown of thorns upon his head. In the words of Isaiah, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. A man of suffering, familiar with pain. You see, Jesus also experienced a dark night before his crucifixion, when in the Garden of Gethsemane he would pray over and over again for God to take the cup, to take the trial that was awaiting him away. Yet not my will, but yours be done. He suffered for us as a way to show us love. So, Therese set her mind on her love for God, even in the midst of her suffering. If you asked Frank what brought it on, couldn't tell you. It was less that he slammed into darkness and more like he slipped into it. It struck him really one week at chapel when everyone was singing words like, "There's joy in the house of the Lord today, and the presence of God is surely in this place." And he realized that as everyone was singing those words, he had no sense of God's presence. That was pretty strange, because Frank was one of those guys that usually was raising his hands and swaying along with everybody else, right? You know? And so, as you might imagine, this was a pretty disorienting sensation. And as types like engineers and architects are prone to do, he set out to fix the problem. At first, he tried some spiritual practices that had invigorated his faith before. He dove headfirst into reading his Bible more and journaling. He would even do some periods of fasting. One Saturday, he took a drive to a nearby nature park just to be away from it all in hopes that being surrounded by God's creation would help him clear his head. But instead of bringing relief, being surrounded on that beautiful Saturday morning by God's creation, he found that it felt like he was simply blind on a path in the middle of the wilderness. Dry, arid, lost. The most frustrating part of this whole experience was that Frank couldn't understand why he was going through this. I mean, on the surface, everything pretty much seemed the same. Everything was fine. And sure, I mean, there were some times recently when the Bible had seemed a little bit more like a textbook. And as many college students are prone, he maybe had not gotten as much sleep as he should have. And, you know, if you pressed him, he could even think of a sin or two, identify some moments of recent failure, a lustful thought here, a sarcastic remark there. But, you know, honestly, he loved God. That hadn't changed. And he loved people. At least he tried to. So finally, after various attempts, he broke down. And he prayed, "God, even surrounded by people who love you, people who love me, I feel alone. Where are you? As Daniel sat in the corner of his small room, a tear rolled down his cheek. Despite his questions, despite his fears and frustrations, despite even his doubts, God had been faithful. He reflected upon this vision that God had given him. And after a few moments in silence, he said, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness." He knows what's in the darkness, and light dwells in him. To you, O God of my ancestors, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power, and now revealed to me what we asked of you, for you have revealed to us what the king has ordered. So Daniel went back to Arioch that next morning, the executioner, and told him that he would be able to help the king with his dream. And after he endured that dark night, Daniel was able to live another day, and then another day, and then another day. And he would live to be an old man. And he saw king after king. He saw empires rise and fall. And in all of this, he was faithful. Teresa's sickness rapidly progressed over the next several months, and she would remain in continual suffering. Yet in the midst of this darkness, this dark night, she found that one thing remained constant when everything else grew dim. That was her love for God. "Is it hard to suffer much?" her sisters would ask. "No," she would reply. "I am still able to tell God that I love him. That is enough." Well, late one night, a sister found her awake in her room late at night, her eyes focused up to the sky, her hands clasped. "What are you doing?" the sister asked. "You ought to be asleep." "I cannot, sister," Therese replied. "My suffering is too great, so I pray." "What do you say to Jesus?" Sister asked. "I say nothing. I just love him." After she endured that hard night, that dark night, Therese finally succumbed to her tuberculosis on September 30th, 1897. She was just 24 years old. Her final words were, "I wouldn't want to suffer less. Oh, I love him. My God, love you." As for Frank, I'm afraid I can't tell you today how his story ends. Frank is perhaps in this room or watching online. And if he is, I hope that at some point or another, everyone he knows that at one point or another, everyone who follows Jesus must endure a dark night of the soul. I hope he knows that oftentimes it's not because you've done something wrong. It could be precisely that you've done everything right. It is a testing of our confidence in God. It is a purging away of the things that would choke out what really matters in life. I hope he knows that perhaps the best thing that he can do if he finds himself in such a circumstance, such a time as this, is nothing. Nothing but to wait. Hold on. Ask for help. Do less. Rest more. Ask somebody else to pray because you can't. Let go your need to hurry. I hope he knows that on the other side of a dark night is the dawning day, and that our God knows. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. For once, you were darkness, but now in the Lord, light. Live as children of light. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you, grant you peace. Go in the presence and peace of God.